We're just going to give it one more minute and then we'll get started here. Thank you everyone for joining. And if you have any questions throughout, please feel free to put them in the chat. All right, thank you everyone for joining. It's nice to see that we have a lot of people interested in applying for state office this year. Hi everyone, and welcome to North Carolina HOSA's first ever state officer application webinar. Today, you'll receive an overview of the application process for next year's Team 48 Executive Council, and we'll hopefully learn some helpful tips for each of the application components. They're all equally important, and so we want to ensure applicants understand how to approach each component as they're developing them. Please keep in mind this application is due February 20th. It's been open for a little bit over a month now. So this meeting is situated kind of in the middle of that deadline. Feel free to ask questions throughout. We encourage you to put them in the public chat so other people can see them and then we can answer them live. Lexi will be answering them as well throughout in the chat, and then we'll also have space after the actual presentation to answer any questions you have. So you can unmute your mic after the presentation or during if we ask for questions, and then throughout you're welcome to put them in the chat. Lexi is our state secretary. And so first and foremost, I'm Nick Ballard, your state president.
I'm Samantha Kamanani, your state president-elect.
I'm Leah Kim, your state vice president.
I'm Lexi Denning, your state secretary.
And I'm Erin Green, your post-secondary collegiate vice president.
And before we give you an overview of the application process, we'd like to answer something that's probably on many of your minds. Should I apply for this position? And what are the benefits of being a state officer? And perhaps some of you are even on the fence, and we'd like to take the first portion of this presentation to go over some of these benefits, both the explicit ones that you can find at the job description, as well as some unique takeaways each of us have gained from this experience. Now, as a state officer, your responsibility is primarily to lead. You're responsible for leading North Carolina HOSA, which includes its members, opportunities, new initiatives you may think of, as well as publications, social media, branding, relationships with other state organizations and international HOSA, as well as federal advocacy and state advocacy. Really, there are endless ways in which you will lead this organization, represent and develop America's future health professionals. So the position is naturally going to have some required elements to it, such as conferences you have to attend, sessions you have to speak at, and tasks you're going to have to complete. But there's also room for your own direction and your team's ideas to truly take flight.
So to give you guys a little brief overview of some year-to-year required tasks, first, you'll be attending the North Carolina's Career Technical Education Conference in the summer, where you get to meet other CTSOs like DECA, FPLA, FFA, and also attend to network with partners, sponsors, and other health professionals currently in the field and with more opportunities. Then around September, you'll be attending the Washington Leadership Academy in DC, where you will have a lot of fun spending time with your team and with other HOSA state officers from across the country, and would really develop your personal skill set during this process. And this is something that is entirely led by the International Executive Council. So you'll have a chance to interact with their opportunities and also tour many famous American monuments in the DC area. So it's a really great time to bond and grow with your team. And then in fall, you'll be helping with the planning and leading of the regional leadership conferences across the state. So all state officers aren't required to attend every RLC. We all kind of share them equally. So you will only be leading the ones that you represent as a super representative. And you won't be expected to miss a lot of school in case that is something you're concerned about. We work with schools in your schedule as much as possible, and we do expect commitment on your behalf as well. And then during the winter and spring seasons, it's really about spending time to prepare for the state leadership conference. And just beyond that, there's a lot of opportunities to get involved with the board of directors and learn how a nonprofit like HOSA works.
All right, now we're going to turn it over to some unique experiences and reflections each of us have about what this position has taught us, and then we'll pause for questions before getting into the application overview. So I'll go ahead and start us off, and I'm going to talk about networking with professionals and with students. So I've been a member of HOSA since I was a freshman in high school, and I'm currently a sophomore in college now. So that's about 6 years that I've been a part of this organization. And I've definitely learned a lot through those 6 years. I'm sure all of you have had teachers tell you before that what you put into this organization is what you'll get out of it. But I'm here to tell you that they are completely correct about that one. One of the most crucial pieces of getting the most out of this organization is networking, and that can be with your peers, industry professionals, or even teachers and advisors from other schools. Before my very first term in office, I was definitely very nervous about speaking to industry professionals. However, during my term, I had the chance to speak with collegiate leaders who were interested in bringing HOSA to their schools and advocating for this organization. And during my second term, my team and I, like mentioned earlier, had the chance to go to Washington, D.C. to meet with government officials and advocate for HOSA, career and technical education, and the Perkins Act. And to be completely honest with you, I was probably just as nervous then speaking to government officials, even though I'd already been through one term and had experience with networking. And I'd, of course, been through multiple interviews since then and had other opportunities to network with professionals. But not only is this helpful for learning how to advocate and share HOSA, but it also helps build connections with people you never thought you would meet. I met my current mentor through networking. And not only does networking apply to industry professionals, but it also applies to your peers as well. Through HOSA and networking, I've genuinely met some of my best friends that I'm still close with today. So you never know who you're going to meet, and it could be your best friend or it could be your future employer. Just remember, when you go into an event like that, go into it with an open mind and get as much out of it as you can. And
Lexi, I think she turned it over to you.
I think I was muted. Yeah, sorry.
That's all right. So I'm going to talk to you guys a little about public speaking. So like Aaron, I've been in HOSA for a very long time. I started in middle school. So obviously my public speaking has changed quite a lot, especially since becoming a state officer. One of the more obvious public speaking areas that you might think of as a state officer is when we're on stage at state conference or at all the regional leadership conferences. And that's just one type of public speaking that we as state officers have to learn how to really successfully communicate our ideas with. But we do our chapter visits, so a lot of virtually speaking like I am right now. So all these skills are something that you're going to use in your career, whether it's speaking over Zoom meetings like this, or it's when we went to the CTE summer conference and we were learning how to speak in front of a group of teachers. So really, learning how to tailor your speeches to your audience, whether it's HOSA members as a whole around the state, if it's a classroom, if it's a bunch of teachers, industry professionals. Public speaking and networking really go hand in hand, but they're all skills that you're going to use in your future career. I know as a state officer, my confidence level with public speaking has, completely risen. I used to be nervous talking in front of a classroom of people, but now it comes a lot more naturally. So being a state officer and getting that exposure has really been an amazing experience. And I know I'll be feeling the effects of it for years to come. Being in high school and being able to have these experiences, having experience talking to people, like Aaron said, like government officials. Of course, we were all very nervous for that because that's a whole nother level. But getting that experience and getting those nerves out of the way and figuring out your public speaking style, what works best for you, and how you can deal with those nerves is really a really great benefit to being a state officer and something that I've really valued out of this experience. So now I'll turn it over to Samantha.
Yeah, my HOSA journey started off freshman year, and it was also a COVID year. So that was, very interesting to navigate through since everything was online. But I was very lucky, and I still feel so grateful now to have had such a supportive community within my local chapter, which was Enloe HOSA. And like I was saying, it was so supportive and everyone wanted to succeed. There was a sense of unity within all of us. And I think every single local chapter can relate to that, because we're all tied together by this passion for healthcare, but we're encouraged to kind of explore it in any avenue that we'd like, whether, someone is interested in EMS or dentistry. And that's what's been so important to me throughout this process, because it's like a journey of self-discovery. And I really appreciated the opportunity to have been able to explore leadership and teamwork skills. And like Lexi was saying with public speaking, I've never been the best at it, but really going out of your comfort zone and pushing yourself has been so impactful. There's definitely this growth mindset that has been ingrained, and I've also strengthened it throughout this process, because, everyone has to start somewhere, and I never thought I would be here, but I really appreciated every single moment of it.
So for me, going off of what Samantha kind of talked about with self-discovery, my experience as a state officer was very eye-opening in terms of learning more about my own self as well, such as my own strengths and weaknesses. I joined HOSA in my freshman year and have had experience as a member, a chapter officer, and then a regional officer, and now a state officer. So over those years, especially as a high schooler, I learned that you aren't really given a lot of opportunities to be in such diverse settings where you get to interact with different individuals and be in situations that you aren't really used to. And I believe this position really makes way for you to find these opportunities and push past the limits that you have put on for yourself. And for me, this was a lot about finding my own voice in speech, like Lexi, and realizing my own leadership style, as well as digging into what I value as a team member. And these are all things that I am really grateful to have experienced as a HOSA state officer, and what I think are stuff that are really valuable for anyone moving forward in their lives.
Yeah, so as you can see, we have some pretty unique perspectives and points across the board. A lot of people coming into HOSA at different divisions, different grades, and different experiences along with that, different things that they took away. And so with this, we're trying to show you that, every state officer, you versus somebody else perhaps that runs for this position, you very well might benefit something that you never would have imagined. And so I started in HOSA my freshman year of high school. Ran for regional office my sophomore year, ran for state office my junior year, and then again my senior year. And then I got a 2-year term, so I'm in my second year right now with Team 47. I was also on Team 46 last year, and for me, really the main benefit was learning how to work with a team. Before I was state officer, my teamwork experience was limited to sports and group projects at school. But this is kind of a bit of a different dynamic, right? You're spending a whole year with this one team, having fun, traveling, and making every effort to fulfill the organization's needs, whether that's maintaining certain things that are in place or starting new initiatives, brainstorming with your team. So identifying each other's strengths and playing to those accordingly was a big learning process for me over the last 2 years. I've had the chance to work with 2 different teams now, and each one had very unique leaders, and especially in the position I'm in now, it's super important to learn from others and to use those strengths as tasks and projects are assigned. So we make sure that we're getting the most optimal and timely results. And so it's been really fun to get to know this team and last year's team, building relationships with people that I would have otherwise never met. And I'm very fortunate to be able to work with them. So now that all of us have shared some benefits with you guys about state office, we're going to move on to the application overview itself. So here in this next portion of the meeting, hopefully we can answer a lot of your questions about the timeline aspect of it, as well as the components and tips that we have for each section based on our own experiences and based on the rubrics that are on the application packet. If somebody is able to put those 2 links in there, the form stack and the state officer application packet, I don't have access to the document. And then we can turn it over to Samantha. I'm sorry, we're going to give a brief overview real quick, the roadmap here. So there's kind of 4 phases. So there's kind of 4 phases here to the application. The first phase is the application packet, resume, transcript, teacher and advisor recommendations, and essay. So that's what you're expected to complete by February 20th deadline, preferably sooner. So hopefully you've already started on the application. If not, hopefully you're able to get that started soon, because there are a few aspects, as you can see here, that need to be submitted by February 20th. And so I've included the form stack link in here for you guys. You can also go to nchosa.org under the State Leadership Conference tab and scroll down to state officer candidate information. And here we have Lexi put in the chat as well, the form stack link for you to access. Again, that's all on the website under the State Leadership Conference tab. And if you scroll down, you can access all the relevant information. So we have, with that application packet, resume, transcript, teacher advisor recommendations, and essay to the form stack. So the form stack actually has some other very small components, like you'll have to submit a photo and things like that. We'll go over that in just a second. Phase 2, so everybody who completes phase 1 will be invited to complete phase 2 as long as they submit it by the deadline of February 20th. And then with that, the teacher recommendations due on the 28th. We'll go over that again in just a moment. Phase 2 is really when you're actually at State Leadership Conference on that Wednesday. I can't remember what day it is, but the Wednesday that State Leadership Conference starts, the first day of State Leadership Conference, you'll be expected to come in and give a speech, an interview, and a written examination. And so using those pieces from phase 2 and phase 1, you'll be given a collective score, a candidate score. And based on those scores, we're going to have 2 candidates per super region that are chosen. So super regions, if you don't know, North Carolina HOSA is divided into 8 regions. And yeah, so in the chat, Wednesday, April 12th is that date for phase 2. So again, everybody from phase 1, you submit everything on time, you'll be invited to phase 2. From that point, we're going to start evaluating the candidate scores. The team responsible for that's none of the state officers, but there is an actual state officer team responsible for evaluating all of the candidates. And then from there, we have 4 super regions. The first one is Northwest and Western regions. The second one, Piedmont Triad and Southwest. The third is North Central and Sandhills. And the fourth is Northeast and Southeast. So using those 4 super regions, we're going to have 2 candidates from every super region chosen. So they don't have to be from different regions in the super region. They can be from the same region. So last year, I know we had people from Sandhills and North Central run for that super region, but both of the super region candidates, or the state officer candidates that were chosen to move forward, were both from North Central because they both had the highest scores out of all the candidates. So please keep that in mind. It's 2 per super region. They'll give a campaign speech. They'll answer fishbowl questions, and they will recite a quote during State Leadership Conference at various different sessions. Again, we'll go over that in the latter portion of today's presentation. And then in phase 4, candidates will be voted on, and state officers installed during the awards session. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Samantha, and she will start on the application packet.
So as Nick was saying, the form stack is due on February 20th, and this is going to be the online portal through which you're going to submit everything. It includes the candidate information, advisor and principal information, as well as teacher recommendations and required documents. Some of these required documents include a colored photo, as well as the application packet, which I'm going to talk about in just a little bit. It also includes the resume and essay. With the teacher recommendations, there's a couple things to keep in mind. You're going to be needing 2 teacher recommendations. So I recommend asking them in advance and trying to find a teacher who can speak to some aspect of yourself, whether it's, your personality or your work ethic. As long as they have something positive to say and you feel like you have a good relationship with them, I would definitely recommend asking them. Teacher recommendations are due February 28th, but they only get sent that email once you submit the application. So let's say you submit your application on the last day. Yes, a recommendation form. Yes. So let's say you wait towards the last day to fill out the application, then your teachers are going to only have 8 days because it's due on February 28th. So to provide a little bit of less pressure for your teachers, I recommend trying to submit your application as early as possible. And this is also good because it can prevent any technical errors. And if any technical issues do arise, you have enough time to solve them. For example, when I was submitting my application, there was too much of a file size, so it didn't go through. So if I didn't have the time to actually fix that, then I likely wouldn't be here today. But in that case, it's really important to submit it as early as possible. Next, I'll be going over the application packet. Yes, the application packet is around 23 pages long, and it provides information about the state officer election process. So I would say it's a great resource to learn more about what this process entails. We do include some information about the travel commitments, as well as the rubric info, so how everything is graded and the points associated with every aspect. And it also includes some forms, such as the candidate information sheet, the medical liability release, the state officer travel policies and permission form, as well as a general liability release, which is going to be signed by your parent or guardian, your local advisor, as well as you as the candidate. The nomination form does require an additional principal signature, so I recommend reaching out to your principal as early as possible to ensure that they're able to get that signed. And if you're interested in running for president-elect, there's also an extra commitment statement of understanding form that you need to fill out. And all of these forms are going to have to be linked onto your form stack, so you're going to have to upload that on. And this application packet can be found under the State Leadership Conference tab on nchosa.org. Next, Lexi will be going over the essay.
Thank you, Samantha. So an important piece of your application is the essay. This is your chance to show who you are beyond grades and extracurriculars. The topic for this essay is what can you contribute to NC HOSA and what does becoming a North Carolina HOSA state officer mean to you? So remember that your essay can be no longer than 1 page, so you'll want to maintain a clear structure and purpose throughout your essay. Be sure that you answer both parts of the prompt rather than just choosing one piece to focus on. State officers are in place to serve NC HOSA and its membership, so it's important to address how you can fulfill that role. We want to know how you specifically can benefit the members of NC HOSA, so you want to avoid just broadly generalizing things that can apply to everyone. You want to be specific on how you as a person can help NC HOSA. This is your opportunity to stand out, so don't be afraid to talk about your talents. For the second part of the prompt, be sure to address why you want to be a state officer. What does that mean to you? What HOSA experiences have prepared you to be a state officer? Much like a college application, this essay is a chance to share your journey, specifically your HOSA journey and how it has made you the perfect state officer candidate. Really, your essay is looking beyond the grades and things that are easily seen in a transcript on paper. This is your opportunity to really show your skills. You want to remain professional, but still let some of your personality shine through, so that we know exactly who you are when we read that essay. All right. I'll turn it over to Erin.
All right, so I'm going to talk about the last component of the application packet, and that is your resume. And all the information that I'm about to go over is in the application packet online at nchosa.org under the State Leadership Conference tab. So your resume is 21 points of your overall score, and it can't be longer than a page, and it must include the information that is listed in the candidate packet. And just so you know, there is no standard way to create a resume. You can use applications like Canva to create a resume, or you can simply just use Microsoft Word or Google Docs, whichever you prefer and have more experience with. And you can also include a headshot of yourself, but you do not have to, and that is not a requirement. A resume is just meant to showcase your skills, experience, and work history, and it's used to highlight how qualified you are for this position. And then the next slide has some example resumes. To the left, you can see my resume that I use for internships, job interviews. That's more of a professional resume showcasing everything that I have done. And then the one to the right is from Rachel Shepard. She is a past state officer, and this was her resume that she used to apply for the International Executive Council. And this one has the requirements that are similar to what is required of you on the application packet. It has HOSA achievements, awards and honors, her summary statement about why she wants to be a state officer, and then it also includes additional leadership as well. And then if you could go to the next slide. So this slide has the resume that I used the very first time I applied to state office. And of course it has HOSA achievements, offices held, involvement, and then the summary statement of why you want to be a state officer. And then this one to the right is another example resume that I got from my mentor. And this is just another professional one that could be used as well. You could use the format, but that's more of a resume for like a job interview. And then I think next we're going to be discussing phase 2, which is interview, oral presentation, and written exam. So I'll turn that over to Nick.
All right, so for phase 2, the interview, you're going to be using the same rubric on that application packet that you used to make your oral presentation, the speech, in other words. And so this is going to be a 15-point aspect of the application. The key tips for this one: ask thoughtful questions following the interview. So after you actually do the interview, you want to make sure that you ask 2 to 3 thoughtful questions. That's something that I think many people forget to do in an interview, and that is something that's in the rubric. So make sure that you pay attention to the rubric and you read over all of the criteria, and you make sure that you ask a thoughtful question that you prepared in advance following the interview. Also, market yourself genuinely. You want to make sure that you're approaching this by being yourself and not somebody else. It's easy to tell for interviewers when somebody is trying to put on a little bit of facade. So you want to make sure that you're being genuine and that you really do want this position. And make sure that you pace yourself as well. I think it's easy for a lot of people to be a little bit too slow, but more often than not, too fast when they're speaking in their interview. And so you want to make sure that you're talking at a speed that is easily understandable by the interviewer. Also, use confident body language. Make sure that, we understand that a lot of candidates might not be the strongest yet with public speaking. And so that's kind of what this position is in some ways meant for, is to develop your public speaking and develop your leadership skills. But you want to make sure wherever possible that you use confident body language, that you greet the interviewer ahead of time with a handshake or something like that, if you're comfortable with that. And then afterwards that you thank them. I would recommend searching up common interview questions and practicing with common interview questions. Rehearse with a friend or a family member, or even in the mirror. Sometimes it's helpful to record yourself on your phone as well and then listen back to what you said, because the tricky thing about interviews is you want to make sure that you have responses and general ideas prepared about the experiences you've had in the past and how they align with the position. But you also, there's obviously an element of that the questions are on the fly and that you might not expect a question that is given to you. And so you want to make sure that you have experiences that you can continually draw back to and ideas that you want to drive home. So highlight what makes you unique as well. If you have a unique interest or a unique hobby, something that you like to do in your free time, I think it's great to kind of sprinkle that in somewhere in the interview, so that way you give the interviewers a sense of who you are as a person and not just as somebody pursuing the position. And with that being said, I will pass it over to Leah, who's going to go over the oral presentation.
Yeah, so for the oral presentation aspect, the maximum amount of points that you can get in total is 15. This is really just a speech component that is part of the screening process to show that you can effectively give a public speech in front of people. So you have a maximum of 2 minutes to present the speech on the following topic. How have you developed as a student, leader, and future health professional as a result of your involvement in HOSA? So it is really talking about your experience with HOSA and how you have developed in various ways from it. You are allowed to use note cards throughout the presentation, but not any props or visuals. And for the note cards, I personally recommend that you don't really write out every single sentence, but more of just like give yourself an outline with cues about the specific key points that you want to talk about. I think this is just easier to follow along and not really overwhelm yourself, especially when you might get really nervous during the presentation. And for other tips that are speech related, like Nick mentioned, make sure to be confident in how you present yourself to the judges. So eye contact and a very open body language is important. And also make sure to dress in professional attire. This just gives a really good first impression, in my opinion. You also want to be very clear in your voice and pronunciation. I think one of the most important things about a speech is your pace. So using dynamics to emphasize your points and even slowing down a little at certain parts can really help you convey the message you want to give to the judges. So these are just some tips that you can keep in mind when outlining your speech.
All right, so next I'm going to cover the written exam, and that is 25 points of your overall score. And the information that I'm reading again will be coming from the application packet. So there are some important things to know before you take the exam. You can look over the HOSA core values, the HOSA creed. It is good to know the international conference theme, as well as the executive council for NC HOSA and the International Executive Council, as well as the North Carolina Executive Committee and Board of Directors for National HOSA. And it is also important to review HOSA history as well as basic parliamentary procedure. And some study tips that I found helpful when I took this test during my first term and my second term. I looked up some Quizlets for HOSA history, and they've already been made by people who were like competing in Quiz Vault and other events for HOSA where they have to know that information. So I definitely found that really helpful. And then I also found it helpful to create flashcards of like the board of directors or the core values and the executive councils as well. So it was an easy format to memorize. And I think if you need to reference this back, then it will be on the executive council packet as well. And then I'll go ahead and turn this over to Leah, who will be talking about phase 3, and she'll start with the candidate speech.
Yeah, so for the candidate speech, this is basically the speech that you will be delivering at the business session. So if you were a voting delegate last year, you might remember some of us coming up on stage to give the speech to the entire delegates. The time limit for the speech is 2 minutes again. Some things I recommend that you include is first something that is catchy. The voting delegates are listening to multiple speeches during this business session, and a nice opening will really help make yours stick out to them. With extra room, you may want to include a little bit about yourself to make your speech more personal. You can talk a little bit about your experience with HOSA, especially if you have led your chapter or your region as a regional or chapter officer. Then I believe the most important parts would be why you want to become a state officer and what goals you want to accomplish as a state officer. So for the goals part, be sure to include how you will actually achieve these goals to really help get the voting delegates to imagine what kind of leader you will be. But of course, the candidate speech is very much something that you can create out of your unique mind. So feel free to include other aspects as well and kind of shape it into delivering who and what kind of leader you are. And of course, the speaking tips, for the oral presentation definitely applies to the candidate speech. So if you want to keep that in mind when you're outlining it, it also helps. Yeah, and I'll pass it on to Lexi for the fishbowl question, or Nick, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're okay. So the fishbowl question, again, is also part of phase 3. So this is going to be for the 2 candidates who were selected per super region. So if you're selected, and we'll expect you to give a fishbowl quote probably at the business session right after your speech. It'll be a 60-second time limit. You'll draw at random from a fishbowl of questions designed to provide delegates a sense of who you are and why you're a good fit for state office. So be sure to practice your public speaking skills to get comfortable answering these types of questions on the fly. But really all we're looking for is, how do you handle a question that is thrown at you that asks about, your host experience or why you want to be, or why you think you're a good fit for this position, or it could be something a little bit more out there. So, and then I'll pass it off to Lexi to go over the leadership or service quote.
Thank you, Nick. So the quote is arguably one of the most important pieces of phase 3. This is your opportunity to make a first impression on the entire membership. So opening session, you'll be called on stage to deliver a quote that's important to you. You'll also have to explain this quote. So you'll want to take the time to really consider why you chose your quote, because you're going to have to really explain it. And that's your way of introducing yourself to the membership. So you want to, when you're choosing a quote, you want to consider your audience. You're talking to the North Carolina HOSA membership, as well as advisors in the audience. So what do you think will give NC HOSA members the best first impression of you? You might select a quote that represents your philosophy, your goals, or your HOSA journey. You might select something that inspires you or that you believe will inspire HOSA members. You might even select something that embodies the values of HOSA. If you can easily explain why you picked your quote, then you know you've chosen the right one. Whatever you choose, remember that first impressions matter, and most importantly, be yourself. You want to still remain professional, of course, but this is really your first impression. And this is not just the voting delegates that you'll be dealing with at the business session. This is the entire membership. So this is the first time they're seeing you on stage, first time you're being introduced as a candidate. Prior to this stage, the membership isn't really aware of who is applying and who's a candidate. So this is your first step out. This is where your campaign really begins. So yeah.
All right, so now that we've given an overview of kind of all of the components, provided you with some tips, I'm gonna quickly re-emphasize a few things before we turn it over to any questions you might have. So deadline for this application, again, is February 20th. Be sure to submit that as early as possible. You wanna make sure you're not waiting until the last minute, because a lot of people might encounter technical difficulties, things like that. So don't wait until the last minute, try to submit it as soon as possible. Also, the things that you're going to want to do as soon as possible, if you haven't already, are contact teachers to give you a recommendation. It's a form, not a letter. 2 teachers, and then your HOSA advisor to give you a recommendation or to submit the recommendation form, which only gets sent after you submit your application to FormStack. So if you submit your application to FormStack on the last day on February 20th, your teachers and your advisor are going to be expected to submit their recommendation form by February 28th. So that's the deadline for their form. And so you want to submit it as soon as possible so you don't put your teachers in a situation where it's a little bit of a quick turnaround. So contact your teachers for recommendations as soon as possible if you haven't already. Contact your principal to get the packet signed. It's a nomination form. It says that they're supporting you and that they will allow you sometimes to miss class as needed for things like state leadership conference and things like that. But again, it's not going to be a situation where you're having to choose. Like, we support you guys with school 100%. It's not too much of a commitment in that sense. So and then it's your responsibility to follow up with teachers and your advisor for the recommendation form. So HOSA doesn't send any reminders. That'll be purely your responsibility. Also, we don't accept guidance counselors for the teacher recommendation. So make sure it's somebody that you actually had a class with. And there's no preference over which subject. So, you could get an English teacher, science teacher, history teacher. There's no preference there. We're recording this meeting today, so if you want to reference back, we're going to post it on YouTube, and then we will put it on social media. If you haven't already, please follow NC HOSA on Instagram and Facebook. We're going to put out there once it's posted. We can't share specifics for the application. So if you have a question about, what exactly is going to be on the test, what should I study? Unfortunately, we can't provide any more feedback other than, make sure that you're checking the application rubrics and that you're continuously referencing back to those, because we can't provide any, preferential treatment to anybody. So if you have a question, we welcome all questions to any of our emails listed on the website, or executive director or the state officer coach. But make sure that it's a question that's, more general and not something specific or something you're asking us to look over for you. And that's all of the points that I had to emphasize. Lexi, did you have any questions from the chat that you wanted to direct to people? And if anybody wants to unmute their mic, please feel free to interrupt us at any time.
Yes, so I have some that I'll answer for you guys. I've seen in the chat. So the first one, so what if you're under the word count and you formatted your essay double spaced, but shows that it's more than one page? So unfortunately, it is a strict 1-page limit. You do have to have, I think it's Arial 12 is your font size, and it's going to be double spaced. The word count is more just to kind of give you an idea of how long it will be. If you're following the guidelines, it shouldn't be more than 1 page really. But it is the 1 page is the real requirement, and it does have to be 12-point font, double spaced. So you will have to shorten it if it goes over. Next question was, can you apply to be a state officer if you're currently a freshman?
Sorry, I'm just going to add one more point to that. It is 1-inch margins. So unfortunately, you can't manipulate the margins. It's basically 12.1-inch margin Arial.
I believe Nick answered this in the chat earlier, but you can apply if you're a freshman, correct?
If you're currently a freshman in high school, you can apply because this will be your sophomore year. Yes.
All right, and then this one's a little more specific to some schools. I know I've heard Enloe does it as far as being nominated by your high school. If you're not nominated, can you still apply? So that's something that's typically done by the high school. We just require that you have the support of your advisor, your parent, and your principal also has to sign off on it. So if you get that support, then you're still able to apply. I know some high schools limit the number that apply, and you have to be nominated. But for us, that's all we require is your parents' approval, your advisor's support, as well as your principal. So also questions about what position you're going to end up in. So you won't really know until you're elected, because you're really just running for a long time. You're just running for your super region representative. And once you're elected, that is just what position you get is decided, one, by if you sign the president-elect commitment, because that is a 2-year position. There are certain separate requirements for that position. So that's, the first kind of thing. But the rest, they are point based. So the highest points based on pretty much everything you've done so far up to that point is what will decide who gets what position. So obviously, president-elect is going to have the highest points, and then you'll go through vice president. So the two positions that are a little bit special with that, president-elect, you do have to sign that form to be considered for that. And then post-collegiate vice president, you have to meet the requirements for that position, being in college, things like that. Let me look through the chat. So who will the initial oral presentation be delivered to? So this is our board of people that will be reviewing your applications as well. So this is, I believe, our state officer coach, people of that nature. Using your parts of your essay in your candidate speech, I would say you can do that. I would definitely try to change it up because you do want to show all aspects of your application and things like that. So I wouldn't want to just repeat the same thing because it will be similar people reading it, and using the speech to further your ideas that you may have talked about in the essay or tried different things. I would definitely encourage that.
To add on to sorry. To add on to what like Lexi was saying about the speech, I would also consider that the initial oral presentation has a specific topic while the candidate speech does not. So to make sure to follow that topic for the oral presentation, and also keep in mind that for your candidate speech, sorry, you're trying to talk to people, other members and other students of our age. So you would definitely want to consider your audience before you're speaking, make it a little more relatable and casual, but also maintain that professional kind of stance in front of them.
All right, thank you, Leah. So I'm going to let Nick answer this one. So prior to being on the NC HOSA board, what experience prepared you most for this role?
I was fortunate to be a part of something at my high school called the Medical Bioscience Academy. I went to high school in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I think that's definitely something that prepared me well for this experience because I had the experience in that way to develop medical education programs at the high school, different opportunities for people. So it was a healthcare oriented opportunity. And it had to do with students my age. So it was kind of similar in HOSA in that regard to HOSA in that regard. But I think, as you're thinking about crafting the essay, maybe some responses for your interview and things like that, it doesn't have to be something necessarily healthcare oriented that you might draw inspiration from or talk about. It could be something that overlaps a certain skill or redefined the way you think about your future career that you might want to talk about. So if you don't have much healthcare experience or health science experience with extracurriculars and things like that, I wouldn't be too worried about that. I think the fact that you're in HOSA is good enough. And if you have other experiences that align in pretty unique ways, then it can be, it can still definitely work.
Great, thank you, Nick. So we have another question. If you're currently a junior, will be a senior next year, can you apply for president-elect? So because we don't want you going out of state to college and, as a junior, you don't really know where you're going yet. We do want you to be a sophomore. Right now we have Samantha, who's our sophomore and president-elect. This means that, you'll still be in high school for your second term. We really do want that to happen. Does anyone have anything to add to that?
So I went to school out of state for, so I applied my rising senior. So I applied my junior year, got the president-elect position, and originally I was planning to stay, to go to school in state, which is really what's encouraged. It happened to work out with me going out of state in Chicago for college right now as a first year because I agreed that I would pay the difference financially between what NC HOSA was already providing for the mileage and then what was required of me to attend. But going forward, this is really, for people who are staying in state. for school. So there's an agreement on there that says, you know, do you plan or do you intend to go to school in state if that's a situation that you're in? So I would really recommend if you check that box that you're, you know, going to school in state.
All right, so our next question is, as a senior who will definitely be going to college in state, can I apply for all the positions available? I believe yes, right? Or is it just, it might just be post-collegiate.
So you can apply for post-secondary. If you're a current senior and you're applying, you'll have to apply for post-secondary collegiate. Unfortunately, high school seniors are not given priority in that process. So we encourage you to apply. But if there is somebody from college who's applying, which we don't have any applications in yet at the moment, so we can't share that information. But if somebody's in college and they're applying for that position, they're automatically given priority because they have experience in college and most likely experience in their college's hosted chapter. But if they, just to reiterate, if there's nobody from college applying, then certainly somebody that's a high school senior can get that position.
All right, thank you. So as far as the financial needs go, NC HOSA covers most, right, if elected. So you will have to buy your uniform and things like that. But as far as like going to ILC and WLA, your flights are covered, hotels are covered, most of your meals are covered. So there's not too much of a financial burden. Like Nick said, though, if you are in school out of state, then you are required to cover that difference between what NC HOSA would pay. They also, you'll get your mileage as well. So when we have to drive to places in state, we get paid our mileage for that as well. So most everything is covered except for things like the uniform and some extra things you might do along the way, but there's not much of a financial burden to come with that. All right, are there any more questions? Yeah, so like Ms. Epperson just put in the chat, you can find the financial policy in that application packet.
There's no preference for any particular grade for position. So the way that that's decided, right, is if you submit your application packet and you check the box saying that you're agreeing to be considered for a 2-year president-elect and president term, there's no preference given to grade levels. Unfortunately, high school seniors can't apply for that position. So it's only current high school freshmen, current high school sophomores, and high school juniors who will be then in the next grade level the following year. And so the top 2 scorers, so Samantha's the current president-elect. She's going to be the president next year. The top 2 scorers from all of the phase 1 and phase 2 application components. So your essay, your interview, your oral presentation, your application packet, your transcript, all of that, that aggregated score, your written examination, is going to be used to rank you by score. And so if the top scorer put on their application packet that they want to be considered for president-elect, they will get that position. If the top scorer said they didn't want to be considered for that, they didn't check the box, then it'll go down to the next person in line who checked the box. And if the second highest scorer said they want to be considered, they'll be the president-elect. And then the vice president is given to the second highest scorer or the highest scorer, period. So if the highest scorer wants to be president-elect, the second highest scorer will be vice president. If the highest scorer doesn't want to be president-elect, they will automatically be the vice president, right? Because they're falling then in line behind the person who checked the box for president-elect, if that makes sense. Secretary and historian, by the way, are not judged on that same basis.
Yes, so we had a question. If you end up as president and have to go to school out of state where it's not feasible, are you able to withdraw an application? So this would be something where you're likely going to know that you're president-elect before, if you're a junior applying for president-elect, you're going to have the position before you really know that. So then that would be a situation of you having to give up your officer position. We definitely strongly discourage that. We don't want to have to replace people, especially if you're elected. Obviously, we can't force you to stay in this position, but we do really want you to. But at that point, you would have to leave your position and you would be replaced by one of the remaining officers.
Yeah, and if there is any question about whether or not you're able to fulfill a 2-year term, then don't check the box. So unless you're like fully confident that you're able to fulfill a 2-year term, whether that means going to school in state or check the financial responsibility section of the application packet. But if you are going nearby out of state and you have and you're able to support the supplemental difference between what NC HOSA provides for mileage, that's really the only instance in which you should be applying. So
Yes, so I know when I was applying as a junior, I did not select that box because I knew I was going to be applying to a lot of schools out of state, where I wouldn't really be able to fulfill all of my duties or, being busy as a college student. So I chose not to select that box because I didn't want that occasion to arise. It is something where, like Ms. Epperson said, you do have to be mindful of the dates and responsibilities, whether it's because you're out of state and knowing that you're going to have to kind of cover some extra costs, or even if you're in state in high school, make sure you're looking at those dates. I know I applied to governor's school at the same time as I applied for this position, but because it fell over ILC, I had to make the decision to decline governor's school to attend HOSA. So that's something you need to think about. That can you attend all those dates? Are you willing to give other things up to be able to fulfill your responsibilities as a state officer? So really take that into consideration, as well as where you're planning on going to school. So again, if you're a current senior, you are only able to apply to the post-secondary position, but you're not given priority over someone who's already in college, because they do have that extra experience.
and just going back cost wise, and as talking about the financial responsibilities aspect, this isn't, so what's expected is outlined in the packets. That includes, for instance, that you purchase the HOSA uniform, everything that goes along with that, khaki pants, khaki shoes, belts, if you don't already have any of those components. So uniform wise, there's stuff like that. You can check the application packet to look at everything. But if you're struggling with that, then we do encourage perhaps that you reach out to or try to find ways to fundraise if that's a concern for you. I'm sure that we wouldn't mind at all helping provide those different resources and like set up those sorts of fundraisers or help you out with that if that's a concern. You would just need to email if you have any questions about any of the financial responsibilities listed in the packet.
For our next question, if you get selected as an officer but move to another school in NC during your term that is outside your super region, does anything change? I'm not quite sure about that one. We haven't had that happen. I don't know if Ms. Epperson can answer that, or any of the other officers. Okay, so you will have to relinquish your role. All right, if a senior already knows they're going to college in state, can you be slated for super region offices? No, because you're not, the super region officers are representing the secondary division. If you are already in college, then you're no longer a secondary member, so you would have to represent the post-secondary collegiate division. So you would have to apply for that position rather than one of the super region representatives. Are there any more questions? All right, so more tips for the essay. Honestly, keeping it professional, but also letting us see who you are. We want to, more than just what's already evident in your application. We want to know how you got to be, what your HOSA experiences got you, why you're applying for a state officer, what's your HOSA story, really include that. I guess really, um, we want to know, I guess, why do you care to be a state officer? What does being in that position really mean to you? What do you plan on doing as part of that position? Talk about your expectations for being a state officer and how you plan to fulfill that role. It's really all I have. I don't know if you guys have more tips.
Yeah, I would say have people look over it. So when you make a first draft, something that helps me when I was writing my college applications, and especially for the HOSA application, was I wrote the draft and then I kind of sat on it for a little bit, went back to it, edited it multiple times, and had different people look over it. So I got as wide of a base of perspectives as I could regarding like revisions that I might need to make, things I might need to delete, or something that maybe I forgot to add. So just having other people look over it and then making sure that they also have access to the rubric if they are looking over it so they can judge it accordingly is definitely going to help.
Yes, so to reiterate what Ms. Kress put in the chat, definitely when it comes time for your speech, practice it out loud. I recommend, I know for me, doing a speech in front of a teacher or a parent is always a little bit more difficult. So I would recommend, finding that person that's going to make you nervous and doing your speech in front of them. That's always really helped me because then I've gotten the scariest part of it over and done with, and definitely time it. I know when I was preparing for mine, I ended up way over on multiple occasions, and you want to be at least a couple seconds under because you don't know how your timing is going to change when you're nervous. So definitely pay attention to that. Our next question, which skill would you say is the most vital in this role? For me, I found it's really teamwork. It is a different type of team than something where you're doing group work in a classroom, because we do work with each other quite a bit, through Zoom meetings, in person at conferences, fulfilling our roles. Really, that is the biggest thing for me, at least, that we get to practice more on a day-to-day basis rather than, we do our public speaking and leadership things in circumstances like this, but really we do require a lot of teamwork, getting our goals done, supporting each other when it comes to our assignments or things we might need help with. So I don't know if you guys have other opinions on that.
Yeah, so at this point, we've gone over the whole presentation. We're just kind of answering any questions that anybody has. Again, if you have questions, put them in the chat, unmute your mic. Aside from that, if you need to hop off for any reason or you have all your questions answered, please feel free to do so. Yeah, so Ms. Kress said state officers work together so they can help and cover for each other. So that's going back to teamwork. Identifying the strengths of other people on our team is something that's really reinforced at the Washington Leadership Academy in September and developed throughout the entire year with different tasks and meetings that we take on. So yeah, thank you for attending. Thanks, guys. Yeah, stick around if you have any other questions. We'll kind of sit here for a few minutes.